Ben Ross from Zscaler. Welcome to the webinar. I'm going to be your host for this morning. In a moment, we're going to start discussing the network and security considerations for Office 365 with our panelists from Zscaler and SkyHigh. So with that, onto our panelists. So today we have, firstly, Chris Hodson from Zscaler. Chris is our CISO for the EMEA region and leads the Office of the CISO for Europe for Zscaler. Prior to joining Zscaler, Chris has spent his entire career as a security leader and professional on the other side of the fence, having held senior positions with Waitrose, Visa Europe, Lloyds Banking Group, and Tesco. We also have Andreas Sengel from SkyHigh Networks. Andreas is CTO for EMEA, and he is responsible for SkyHigh's vision and architecture, as well as cloud security innovation. He brings more than 16 years' experience in enterprise-class technology, having worked with Citrix, PGP, and Symantec. Welcome to you both. Welcome to the webinar.
Morning, Ben.
Thank you, and let's get going. Let's start off with probably a good place to start is adoption rates, and looking at the growth of Office 365. Andreas, maybe you could get us started with this one.
Sure, thank you very much. Hello. Yeah, Office 365 adoption rates, this is something we at SkyHigh have very good visibility in because we see what cloud services users are actually using by analyzing that traffic. And what we see here is that larger companies are massively adopting Office 365. So more and more, not only in Europe, but obviously across the globe, there is a large adoption of Office 365, where enterprises are leaning more and more into using at least one or two of those Office 365 cloud services. So it doesn't mean that all Office 365 components are used in this area.
Just, Ben, I just wanted to kind of add very quickly to that. So obviously, welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here. I think whilst, I'm a security professional, I'm a CISO, and most of the conversations I have start off, certainly ostensibly, as conversations around security posture, around threat landscape. I've been blown away in the 9 months that I've been with Zscaler with the number of conversations around Office 365, specifically around mail and around sort of SharePoint. But primarily, you'll go in and talk to a CIO, and it's amazing for me in all industry verticals quite how many organizations are adopting Office 365 now. It's really been, certainly the stats that we have on screen here back that up, but there'll be certain industries where I think possibly they're keeping an on-prem presence, but certainly this seems to be pervasive in all industry.
And if we look at this next build on the slide, you can start to see where, what kind of applications are driving this. Is that a surprise to you to see OneDrive for Business being the highest ranking?
I'll take that quickly, and I'll certainly pass to Andreas for his experience at an app level. Possibly quite surprising, to be perfectly honest. I would have expected to see Exchange Online being certainly the I don't want to say path of the least resistance, but certainly the most heavily used Office application potentially. I'm sure, and I'm sure Andreas has some views on this, but I certainly would see that kind of the OneDrive or the file sharing side of things being the most open to abuse potentially. But I'm surprised to see OneDrive for Business being the highest. Yeah, what's your take on that, Andreas?
Yeah, so OneDrive for Business, I think, is really that high because it's actively used by users. It's very often a solution that the companies don't have an answer for, or a problem that companies don't have an answer for on premise. So most organizations already have Exchange. So they are operating in a migration mode or in a hybrid mode and are still adopting Office 365. You see the stats are from about half a year old. I think that changed massively towards Exchange. But OneDrive for Business is something the users are requesting and the business needs, and there is no other real option on premise to go there. And that's why we see the adoption rate here for OneDrive for Business so high. Mm-hmm. What's I think also important to mention is that even though we see those Office 365 adoption rates, organizations still go into very diverse cloud adoption. So there might be companies who are just using OneDrive for Business here from Office 365, but are then using for example, Salesforce as well, or other cloud services. We see organizations that are adopting Exchange, but then using Box for file sharing. So there's a big diversity in here as well.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, go on, Chris.
No, I was just going to say certainly one of the benefits of OneDrive for Business is it gives organizations a route away from this shadow IT problem for file sharing. Certainly a lot of CISOs and CIOs that I talk to, as you know, Ben, we go in on a quarterly basis with our customers and sort of walk them through some of the traffic that they're seeing. And, you know, you have this, I suppose, myriad of different file sharing solutions that organizations are having to contend with, as Andreas said, you know, be those Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever it is. So certainly by consolidating or aligning on OneDrive for Business, you have that visibility, I suppose.
Okay, and looking at, turning now to what are the drivers behind it? You know, so why are these adoption rates so high? Chris, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, I mean, they're not dissimilar, in all honesty, to the drivers for public cloud computing. You know, conceptually anyway, be that infrastructure as a service or software as a service, as we're discussing here. So a key point for me is we put here as ubiquity, but you know, that ability for users to have access to their data from all locations on any device. Obviously, there are some security considerations for how we facilitate and enable that securely. Lots of CIOs that I talk to have this cloud first strategy, right? So I know in some organizations it's a 2020 vision of no on-prem data centers. Others are slightly more conservative, but they are looking at cloud where they can. So as their licensing agreements come to a natural refresh cycle, or as hardware within data centers is becoming end of life, organizations are looking to shift from CapEx to OpEx. They are looking to lower costs. They are looking to support the CIO's direction of cloud first. So I think the drivers for Office 365 kind of align or match or are parallel to general drivers for cloud adoption, and Andreas mentioned a number of those there. So, you know, we're seeing HR platforms go to Workday in the cloud. We're seeing CRM become almost ubiquitously Salesforce. So I think Office 365 is really just kind of driving and matching what we're seeing in the wider cloud adoption space, really.
So I think one driver that we must not forget is also the push from Microsoft itself. So those companies that I talk with or CIOs buying software, they also say like they are really pushed by Microsoft to move away from the on-premise deployment. And if you look at how you purchase Exchange licenses today, it's kind of a hurdle to actually still get a license for an on-premise Exchange server. So it's not only the big ubiquity and the lower cost, but it's really the general push of the market and also Microsoft towards using the cloud. And it's really hard to say anything against it. So if you compare how much money companies invest today in maintaining a global infrastructure of Exchange servers that are quite complex to administrate and to run and take quite some resources, and you can flip this to just a monthly flat fee per user, that can be a very easy decision on the first side, not to forget the security controls. And that is, I think, really where then the CISOs start scratching their head. Okay, I have to build security around this new way of deployment, and I have to find ways to make the Office 365 in the cloud or Exchange in the cloud as secure as I have it on premise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and turning then to you know, so we've talked about the drivers behind it, but turning now to connecting to Office 365. So, what's the best way of doing that? You know, we've got three options laid out here. There's probably some others, but Chris, do you want to start on this one? Yeah,
I'll start. I suppose I'll start by running through my experience of what I'm seeing, because I could end this conversation very quickly by saying what I think is the best route, but we'll come on to that. I think this is an area of consideration for the network guys, certainly. It has a security association, but I feel I feel maybe wrongly, and I really hope that the audience today put some questions across on this or some thoughts. But a lot of the time we have a top-down view that we're adopting cloud services. That might be the CIO, the CTO. In some organisations, maybe the board have a view on this. We're going Office 365 is the top-down message, and sometimes it's left to the IT organisation, to the network engineers, to the architects of this world to work out what that means. And from my experience, different organisations are approaching this differently. So some organisations are trying to go down the existing proxy route. So a traditional proxy architecture of they're backhauling traffic to their data center and going out via their existing proxy platforms. And we'll come on to some of the considerations, I hope, or the implications of that route shortly. A number of organisations have ExpressRoute. So for the guys on the call who don't know, ExpressRoute is essentially direct peering with Microsoft. I believe it's at a layer 2 level, so you have that almost an extension of your network into Microsoft. But obviously that has a cost implication, quite significant cost implication, whereby you're not going to enable that in every office location that you have. So down the Express route, we still have that consideration of backhauling of traffic. So you're still bringing that into a number of data center locations in almost all scenarios. And the third option is obviously localized breakout. And I'm sure we're going to come on to this, but that's certainly an approach that Microsoft are actively supporting and encouraging their customers to go down, whereby you're using internet, essentially commodity internet at each of your office locations to go out directly to Office 365 via your local hop, essentially. So there are nuances or configuration considerations for each of those, but primarily they're the three routes that we're seeing. I'm interested if Andreas has seen any others, or if anyone disagrees with that. But primarily they're the three that we see.
Right. I think that there's like a mixture a little bit where we see some organizations backhauling traffic, but then excluding Office 365 at the proxy they have on premise. But generally, those are the three ones. And as you mentioned, the localized breakouts ones, I think that's really the one that is more cloud native. That's the way Microsoft built Office 365 to be accessed by localized breakouts by going directly as possible from the endpoint to Office 365.
Okay. And I had a quote here about Office 365 that comes from Microsoft, how they're recommending ExpressRoutes. But I think we've probably covered that already. Chris, anything else you wanted to add on this point?
Just very quickly, I don't want to, obviously, this is being recorded, misquoted of saying, there are no uses for ExpressRoute. So ExpressRoute has its place, if you have an Azure architecture, if you are talking to Microsoft for some low latency applications from your data center and you're extending that network, then yes, ExpressRoute is the route recommended by Microsoft for those applications. We're talking here around Office 365 traffic, and this is a consideration for organizations. This is something that is very different. That localized enablement of traffic, it's supporting the way that we're going with software-defined networking and software-defined WANs. Obviously, they're coming into prevalence now in most organizations, certainly in the way of strategic thinking. And that kind of aligns, as Andreas quite rightly said there, a cloud-native architecture. So this localized breakout is really facilitating that cloud-native. And a key consideration is if organizations do really want to leverage the flexibility and the cost savings of cloud, and for the purpose of this conversation, O365, that really is the route that we need to be looking at.
Okay. So we see some misconceptions here as well, or I hear about some misconceptions about ExpressRoute all the time. So sometimes companies adopting Office 365, they think like ExpressRoute is my secure link to Office 365. So if I just route everything via ExpressRoute, then no one can get it in the middle, and I'm secure. But that's really not what ExpressRoute is meant for. As you can see in this quote, ExpressRoute is really a way for your organization to access your infrastructure as a service and your platform as a service environment that's running on Azure faster. So it's more like your users from the internal network getting access to applications that you build in Azure, or also the organization's customers accessing those applications in Azure. ExpressRoute is really not the dark fiber, the direct connection to Microsoft Office 365 for your users. It doesn't really help in that area.
Okay. Good. Okay. Well, let's turn now to some of the kind of cost considerations and infrastructure upgrade costs being kind of the primary consideration. Chris, what are your thoughts on this one?
I suppose it's about understanding hidden costs, isn't it? I think this kind of goes for a lot of cloud computing, regardless of the service and deployment model, right? It's about understanding true cost savings and across CapEx and OpEx, right? So we've put 3 down here that I think they're the 3 areas that I get the most, I suppose, questions or concerns about. So we'll cover them in turn. So the first one here, and these are some stats that obviously we have internally based on our experiences, but a fairly significant uplift in network utilization costs. So certainly for 2 of the key applications that myself and Andreas touched on earlier. So when you're looking at OneDrive and Exchange, you know, the increase in network utilization to Microsoft, when previously you may have had your Exchange file share architecture on-prem. So in some organizations, we're seeing up to 40% increase in bandwidth utilization, so in network costs that we're seeing there, which is certainly significant in the organizations I've worked at on the end user side. I think if you went to the people paying the bills and explained that, that's certainly something that will get their attention. A lesser known consideration, the increase in number of open sessions to Microsoft. So again, I deliberately today didn't want to get into the weeds on a number of these things, and I'd love to have follow-ups in that space, but we're talking, I think, approximately 20 HTTPS connections per app to the Microsoft Cloud, in inverted commas, for each application. So that's a significant uplift on your network appliances in each location to facilitate that. And yeah, the point that you put on here, Ben, around additional MPS backhauling costs, it almost is compounding the other problem that we've got here of the 40% higher utilization edge to Microsoft. You've also got these significant costs. If you take the ExpressRoute architecture or centralized proxy services that we touched on in the last slide, if your organizations are backhauling traffic into that data center to then go out to Microsoft, and we'll talk in a moment about user experience. MPLS is expensive, and you're adding to that cost by backhauling that traffic to Microsoft.
Okay. I think what I want to add here is really that if you look at it, infrastructure upgrade cost considerations come in play when you move to the cloud. The cloud actually gives you an opportunity to also decrease that cost. By leveraging the right services in the cloud that provide you the right functionality. So I think it's really important to say, don't go old school routes to the cloud. Don't duplicate traffic over and over again by backhauling it and routing it throughout the world and then routing it back through a central network. Use the cloud as an opportunity to actually decrease the infrastructure cost, instead of getting way into an architecture where you ultimately pay some money that you save with the software or on the licenses and on the operations. You don't want to spend this money in here without really noticing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Andreas. And I think this is certainly a conversation, Ben, that I have with customers or at industry events that I'm speaking at, is the adoption of Office 365 as a suite of SaaS applications, should we say, without actually looking at the underpinning network architecture. So, you really are getting limited benefit if you're looking at some backhauling architecture. I go and talk to customers who say their Office 365 environment is poor, it is jittery, it doesn't work in the way they expected, and then you kind of unravel how things are set up, and it's almost, I suppose, square pegs in round holes. We're trying to make Office 365 work and communicate through an architecture that was kind of designed for on-prem end-tier applications. So it's certainly something to address. I hate the phrase holistically, but it's true. You know, you need to be looking at this from an application, a network, and a security perspective, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's turn now to some of the kind of network considerations and the complexity around that, and particularly around firewalls. Chris, I know we were talking about this the other day. Do you want to expand on some of these points?
Yeah, I mean, most of these are related to conversations, and I'm sure some of the guys on the phone may have a view on this. But you know, Microsoft had, being the operative word, a view that, you know, when you're looking at, I suppose, configuration issues or routing issues or performance with Office 365, you know, sometimes the guidance has been, you know, do you have proxy architecture in place? You know, that can potentially be causing some issues. And I just wanted to run through, you know, certainly in a Zscaler stack, that isn't the case, and Microsoft have come out and have actually said that now, that, you know, they will look into configuration and support with Zscaler being your root to Office 365, and we'll come on to that. But there are some traditional issues that need to be understood. So from a NATing, from a network address traversal perspective, you know, Microsoft, I think their limit is 2,000 users behind a public IP address. So that's certainly a consideration through traditional proxy architecture. An enormous headache, and before I came to Zscaler, I really didn't appreciate quite how much of a headache this is. But maintaining, we've put here maintaining whitelisted URLs. So it's whitelisted URLs and IP addresses of Microsoft's points of presence and architecture on essentially the internet. So I speak to some customers who have, you know, the operations and engineering guys who are maintaining these allow lists on firewalls and on proxy architecture, you know, and it's a really, really time-consuming, onerous task that we've got there as well. And another point that we wanted to raise was around sort of visibility, around sort of a pack file config from a browser perspective, and how are you actually routing that traffic? So, you know, Office 365 and the architecture of Office 365 doesn't really lend itself particularly well to pack file config. You know, a lot of organizations, a lot of users are going to be using Microsoft clients, be that Outlook client, be that you know, a Skype client, whatever it is. So, you know, we're not seeing this traditional HTTP, HTTPS traffic flow that, you know, your pack files are intercepting and routing through a proxy, simply because the traffic isn't going over, in a lot of cases, 80 or 443. But when we're talking about complexity, certainly, you know, the way that we do it as Zscaler is through our one-click technology, right? So route traffic to us, enable one-click, have Zscaler manage the URLs and the IP lists from Microsoft. But yeah, these are again, I think it plays on the previous slide and the point I raised about trying to almost shoehorn a traditional architectural approach into what is essentially a new paradigm, a new way of consuming apps. So I would urge the guys on the phone to be looking at that. If we're looking at kind of traditional proxy architecture or the backhauling approach, consider the NAT traversal considerations, and also the whitelisting, the operational overhead, the hidden costs of going down that route.
Okay.
I can add to that really about the old approach of breaking open a HTTPS connection on an on-premise proxy. Imagine you've got like 10,000 users using OneDrive, and that's synchronizing their files. Look in your home document folders. Every user has a couple of gigabytes and thousands of files in there. And now just trying to scan all that on an on-premise proxy server can get you into a nightmare, because it's so much traffic. It's pretty much like you want to scan on your proxy server all the traffic that the client had before between the file servers. So this is really hard to manage from a capacity perspective, but it's also questionable about the benefit you get. Why would you break open, for example, the connection of an Outlook client to Office 365 Exchange server? Is that the right level of inspection? Does it actually make sense to look into that traffic? Very often it doesn't, because you have to look at applying the security controls at the right parameter. So for Exchange, for example, I don't have a lot of customers that are concerned about the data that's going from Outlook client to the Exchange server. the customers are concerned about emails leaving the Exchange server to external users. So more and more we see enterprises trust Office 365 to say, all right, I actually don't have another chance. I have to trust Office 365 in holding my sensitive data, but I'm really concerned when it leaves that perimeter. So why should I scan all the traffic that goes into Office 365 on premise with an old proxy that requires a lot of capacity if I'm really concerned about the data leaving Office 365?
That's a great point.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the user experience here and talk about this for a minute. Chris, is it really all about latency? Is that the big thing?
Should I just say yes? It's a major consideration, right? So and again, in an ideal world, we all have very fast, always-on connections from all of our satellite offices through, through a direct connection through some form of leased line to a data center, but that doesn't happen in all locations. I think if you're backhauling traffic before you're sending it out to Microsoft, let's assume conservatively there's a 40 to an 80 millisecond delay or a level of latency between that coming into your data center before you even go out to talk to Microsoft. That's a real problem. I mean, the figure you put on the slide there are 50 milliseconds from each client app. That's Microsoft figure. That's not a Zscaler recommendation. So achieving 50 millisecond latency from each client app is extremely hard to do with, best will in the world. So, improving user experience, primarily, there are other concerns. Yes, the size of the pipe, as opposed to the speed of it is also a consideration, but yeah, latency is a major killer. Certainly, it's a grumble point when I talk to organizations around their Office 365. They say that it just takes too long within, let's say, Outlook, for example, or page refreshes of their SharePoint, whatever it is. Microsoft have put those recommendations in for a reason, and I'm interested in Andreas's view and his experience. But from what I see, the customers who are really getting the happy users who, you have people tell you what a great move it was to go to Office 365. They're the guys who are breaking out locally. They're not the guys who are backhauling their traffic to their data center. And, as I say, 50 milliseconds is fairly hard to achieve. Certainly for distributed organizations who aren't, working on maybe one or two hub spoke sites, who have a broader proliferation of offices, it's very hard to achieve that 50 millisecond, definitely.
Okay. That's right. 50 milliseconds to achieve is a bit of a dream for many organizations, I think. So you always have to calculate this a little bit higher. But yeah, it's all about improving the user experience. So again, this goes back to the point about old school infrastructure and backhauling traffic. The more you route traffic around the world, the higher the latency will get, obviously. So I think key point here is to only get in between connections where it's really interesting, where it really makes a sense from a security perspective. Why should I break open a connection? Why do I do an SSL interception, man in the middle on traffic where I couldn't act upon or where I can't read anything? For example, things like Skype traffic. Skype communicates between the client and the Office 365 backend with its own encryption mechanism that can't be looked at, even if you break the connection open via TLS. Or you've got applications that use certificate pinning that don't even allow you to break open that TLS connection. So I think key here is to look at the security and the risk exposure, analyze where's the biggest risk, and then only get in between there. Mm-hmm. An example of what our customers do is they only break open the TLS connection when the connection to Office 365 comes from an unmanaged device. So it's something that they don't have under control. They see someone connecting from a mobile phone that is not under management, logging into their Office 365 instance. In that case, they break open the TLS connection because they want to control things what's downloaded from Office 365 to that mobile phone. Mm-hmm. But if they see this is a managed device that uses Zscaler and it's coming via the defined route, it has a Zscaler agent installed, then there's no need for me to get in between there, and I get the connection through as directly as possible to improve the user experience.
Mm-hmm. And just on that user experience, we've got an example here from Kelly Services. Chris, I know you're familiar with this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, actually, just to close off just very quickly on the last point, I know the 50 millisecond advisory is a Microsoft recommendation, but I think, you know, that whole model that Andreas was walking through there is applicable for essentially all software as a service applications, right? This concept of backhauling your traffic into a data center to essentially go out to the internet to go back to your remote site. You know, it's just breaking. It's essentially breaking the internet and the way that it was designed. This tromboning, as we call it, is just giving us a poor user experience for all of these applications. And I think that that's certainly something we should be considering. I speak to some organizations who have up to, you know, approximately 75 or 80% of their data center traffic, so essentially ingress to their data center over MPLS. Its ultimate destination is the internet. So, you know, for 80% of the cost of that line, you'll pay for something that doesn't actually need to go to the data center. And to lead on from that, Kelly Services is a great example of that. They obviously combined using their Zscaler service with the capability that we provide, or bandwidth control, to actually maximize. So again, we're having localized breakout, but they obviously had an issue with YouTube traffic. Who doesn't? You know, organizations using YouTube for professional and for personal reasons, but obviously having that traffic going out and consuming an awful lot of bandwidth. And, you know, during recently the Soccer World Cups, through European Championships, through the Olympics, we're seeing these web services for streaming media just consuming a pipe. And that's a consideration for Office 365 here, is making sure that that traffic gets a higher priority than other services that potentially can afford to only use a smaller amount. So yeah, Kelly Services capped their YouTube traffic at 20%, made sure that Office 365 was available for their users as and when they needed it. Definitely.
Okay. Now, when we're talking about bandwidth distribution and capping services, one of the first question I get from my customers is, yeah, but how do I know which service to cap? Where do I put in my bandwidth controls? And that's where an area where SkyHigh specializes in as cloud access security broker, to really gives you the visibility about which cloud services, which shadow services your users are using. Because at this customer, I assume they capped YouTube at 20%, but their users didn't take long to find another streaming service or another video service where they can get the similar content, which is not capped. And that's really an area that's important for organizations to look at, understand what cloud services are used, having a risk assessment of those cloud services. Is that a consumer-focused cloud service? Is it a cloud service that's also used by my business? How big is the data risk if data is actually uploaded to those cloud services? And then putting in the right controls, going back to Zscaler and say, I want to specifically block the following 25 high-risk cloud services and make sure that this enforcement stays.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think sometimes we approach that challenge from one side or the other. We very rarely look at both. So as we talked about here, Ben, there's obviously the network and performance considerations, but certainly, yeah, working with Zscaler and SkyHigh on identification and risk scoring and ultimately blocking of you know, insecure, not even insecure, applications that break your information security policies. So looking at it from a performance and a security perspective, I completely agree.
Okay. I think we've probably, just moving on to the next slide, I think we've probably covered off most of that. So moving on to security considerations, just picking up there, we kind of started to touch on it a little bit. Andreas, do you want to lead us off with some of the key security considerations?
Yeah, of course. I think I mentioned some of them earlier, but that's, again, the point where the CISO scratches the head. The company needs to move to a cloud service, needs to move to Office 365. How can I still make sure that my data is still handled securely, that I still stay compliant to all those regulations I have to be in. Just imagine being in the banking sector, in the finance sector, more and more regulations come up. How can I ensure that I'm still compliant? And I think those are very good topics here to say, managing access. Now that my data sits out there in the internet, how can I manage who has actually access to it? Should I allow all my users actually being able to share a OneDrive folder with everyone in the world? It's like opening up a network share to everyone over the Google Mail address. Is that the right level of access I'm giving my users, but also who's accessing the Office 365? Everyone can go to login microsoftonline.com and try out a couple of passwords. Compliance needs, I think, an area where we look at data loss prevention controls. That's the thing we were talking about earlier. Break open the TLS connection and look into it, what goes into Office 365. That doesn't make you compliant. What you need to do is you need to take those old school compliance controls like SMTP DLP, email gateways, and this collaboration control. You need to take this into the cloud as well. Now that your data sits in the cloud, you need to apply the security controls in the cloud. Emails are not going through your network anymore or going out of your perimeter anymore. They are going out of Microsoft perimeter. How can I do a data loss prevention on outbound emails? And detecting compromised accounts goes back to the point that everyone, that the login is always available. People don't need to VPN in to trying to log into Office 365. It's available 24 hours every day and is also open to attacks. So here's important to look at activity logs from Office 365, figuring out user behavioral analytics, leveraging machine learning on how users work with Office 365 to detect compromised accounts or maybe even malicious insiders. And that's the considerations companies come to with the two SkyHigh networks in trying to solve those problems, because that's often stopping them from adopting Office 365.
Okay. And Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Just to pick up on a couple of points just to support what Andreas is saying there. I think the first one, and the overarching consideration is, location shouldn't necessarily be the primary consideration with your security architecture. We really need to go back to some of the basics here and look at, I know we often sort of always regurgitate people, process and technology, but certainly when we're looking at data leakage, first off, let's look at the classification of our information. If we are sending, as we will be in the case of Office 365, sensitive, confidential, highly confidential information out to the public cloud, as we are in this conversation today, let's make sure that we define an appropriate, at first glance, let's define a logical architecture. Let's define a set of capabilities for data leakage, for inspection of traffic, as Andreas says, to have the appropriate authentication and authorization, and let's build out what the technology is to support that once we've defined what we need. I think compliance is a key consideration here as well. I think with a lot of cloud service providers, Microsoft and Google, let's not forget in this conversation that a lot of what we're discussing today will apply to Google Apps as well, to Google Mail. I talk to a lot of organizations who have decided to go down the Google route as opposed to the Office route. So security capabilities have matured, almost exponentially over the last 5 years to match the demand and the growth of cloud adoption. So let's make sure that when we go down the cloud route that we apply commensurate security to how we have previously on-prem. With regards to the rest of this, again, I think Andreas has done a great job of covering those points now. A key consideration, I said in a talk I did last week, you can't outsource accountability. So just because Microsoft are hosting your data, you are still ultimately the data owner. And yes, and certainly in a GDPR world, the data processor has should we say, more responsibility or accountability, but ultimately your data. Yeah, so let's make sure that we understand those controls and capabilities that we need, and certainly by adopting a combination of localized breakout via Zscaler and the level of DLP protection and access management that SkyHigh give you. It gives you that like for like, that appropriate level of control, guys.
And there is actually a build to this slide, Andreas. I know we touched on this last week when we spoke. This looks at where the data is stored, where sensitive data is stored. Do you want to just talk us through some of these numbers?
Yes. So the big number here really shows that more than half of the data that enterprises, that organizations store in a cloud is sensitive and is stored in Office documents. But that's obvious. If you think about it, it's sure the users are storing their data that they need to work with in their home drive folder. In their home folder, this is now synchronized to OneDrive, it's synchronized to Box or other cloud services, and then you've got all those sensitive data out in the cloud. Going back to what Chris said about thinking about data classification, where do you start with data loss prevention? I think many companies already have an idea of what is allowed and what's not allowed. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's blocked to send out that type of data, but at least that it's monitored. If a document comes along that contains a certain header which says this is company confidential in an email, then it'll either be blocked or there will be some incident being created so it can be reviewed. Now, with all that in place, I really want to give you an example about what we had with a large airline recently. They had the Office 365 project all going. They paid licenses for a while. They did their proof of concept and everything. And then all of a sudden, security figured out that they can't be compliant with it and stopped the whole Office 365 project until it was proven that you can apply the very same controls that they had before on-premise for emails, for outbound emails, and for documents leaving the organization, but they can apply the very same controls to Office 365. So with these numbers, what you see is you even see PST files. That's scary. People uploading whole PST files, email archives into the cloud, into OneDrive, where it's really just one click away from sharing with everyone. Make sure when you think about moving to Office 365 to bring in your compliance department, to bring in your security department early, to make sure you don't see any of the security or compliance requirements stopping you from going ahead with that project. That is one piece of advice I can really give you.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we've kind of covered off security considerations, and with an eye on time, let's just turn now and we've discussed quite a few topics already, but Andreas, could you give us kind of the elevator pitch on why SkyHigh for Office 365?
Of course, and I think those 5 bullet points here summarize it quite well. We're enforcing data loss prevention policies where they need to be enforced. We're controlling who can share data in OneDrive, in SharePoint with external people, which type of data is it. Putting together content and context to build the right data loss prevention policy. We're wrapping a security perimeter around Office 365. We can detect internal and external threats. We see what your users are doing in Office 365 and can act upon those. And we can deploy those common security measures not only to Office 365, but also to the diverse network of cloud services that an organization might adopt. Because we all know Office 365 is not the only cloud service that companies use, and they must enforce the same policies and controls across those cloud services and not just that one.
Okay. And Chris, for Zscaler?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So again, we've broken this down conveniently into 5 points, but I just want to run through each of those in a level of detail. So what we do is a proven deployment model. We have over 700 customers. We identified Kelly services there, but obviously we have a large number in many industry verticals who are using localized internet breakout for Office 365, and they're routing their traffic directly through Zscaler. So something that isn't on this slide, we're directly peered with Microsoft in, I believe it's 14 of our data centers and growing. So Microsoft have 32 data centers globally for their Office 365 deployment, and we are working to match that and be locally with those guys in each of those. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is you guys have the best possible user experience. You know, you have the faster response times. You can comply with that under 50 millisecond requirement of Microsoft's because you're not backhauling. We don't have a requirement to send your traffic to your data center location. If you have a user in Paris, let them break out in Paris to go to Office 365. If they're in Melbourne, Australia, let them go out locally. You know, we don't have that need to send traffic tromboned through to your data center through expensive MPLS, you know, so there's a cost implication, but also that user experience angle that we covered. A key consideration for most of our customers, we don't need to wheel in expensive appliances. You know, as a Zscaler Business Suite customer, this capability for Office 365 is there. You know, if you want to adopt bandwidth control to really have effective quality of service on this capability, it's one click. We've got here on the slide enable Office 365 and a tick box, but that's quite literally what you need to do is enable one click, as with a number of our services. You know, we're a security as a service platform provider. We're not a collection of point products that are loosely coupled. It's a platform. As I said, we don't have any hardware, we don't have any backhaul, and the key consideration for me, and I wrote a blog recently on, I think it was on LinkedIn, around the power of a platform from a security perspective and from an Office 365 perspective. But that's extremely important, to have one console, one administrative interface for all of your client security needs. And again, that integrates into the Sky-High platform that Andreas has been talking about today. So I suppose in a nutshell, the reason to adopt Zscaler for Office 365 is to securely and from an operational efficiencies perspective have that one-stop shop for localized breakout for 365.
Okay, fantastic. So the next part of this, when the slide moves on, there we go, is takeaways. So you know, having kind of gone through all of the issues, you know, what would be the key kind of takeaways, the key kind of things that you would offer out to our audience? And Andreas, maybe you could go first.
Sure. I think I mentioned one, like make sure you include security and compliance early in the project when you start moving to Office 365. Make sure you think about the way how you apply security to Office 365 as a cloud service in a cloud-native way. Don't use old controls, use the new controls. If you're doing security for a cloud service, do the security in the cloud as well. The last thing you want to do is you want to save, or you don't want to spend money on on-premise security equipment just by getting another service out in the cloud. If you're going to the cloud, make sure you put all the requirements out there as well. And well, obviously one of the takeaways is include a cloud access security broker like Sky-High into that consideration, who can offer exactly that functionality around Office 365, and make sure you can go ahead with your Office 365 project as needed in a secure manner.
Okay, and Chris?
Yeah, just to reiterate some points or expand on some points from earlier, I just think it's very important to have a robust kind of IT architecture, right? So define what you want to achieve from a services, from a capabilities perspective, and then I suppose address location secondarily. So I know Andreas was raising this point earlier, but you know, if you understand your data flows at a logical level, so you know, client application talking to, I don't know, email server or whatever it is, that abstracted layer, you can then identify through kind of, I suppose, with my CISO hat on, a process of threat modeling. So identify firstly the classification of the data, the types of data that are traversing across that infrastructure, but then also look at the use and misuse cases potentially of threat actors on that. And from there build up, I suppose, a capabilities architecture, a set of controls and requirements. And as we said earlier, location isn't the primary or defining factor there. Through a combination of Zscaler and SkyHigh, we can provide best-of-breed security and enablement components to securely and efficiently enable Office 365. So, I mean, that would be my primary takeaway. And certainly, I think it's in slide maybe 4, 5, and 6, and 7. Those hidden costs, those considerations we talked about earlier. So the requirements for network address traversal limitation, the increased bandwidth, up to 40% increase in network utilization. The number of HTTPS connections that a traditional proxy architecture will have you add to your complexity. So just don't look at Office 365 as a silver bullet. There are some fantastic business benefits, but it's just very important that it's enabled securely and efficiently.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Chris. You can find out a lot more on our websites, SkyHigh Networks and Zscaler.com. There's lots of other content around Office 365 to download and to look at, as well as recorded webcasts. You can follow us both on Twitter at SkyHigh Networks and at Zscaler, and you can also follow Chris. Chris is quite a big user of Twitter, so he's Chris H Infosec. And with that, I would just like to say thank you very much to our panelists, Andreas Engel from SkyHigh and Chris Hodson from Zscaler. Thank you very much for your time this morning. And then finally, thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining. I hope it was a useful and interesting session. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, Ben.